When your father-in-law calls you into his office and says, "We're cutting your salary in half. Take it or leave it," you know you're about to get screwed. But here's the thing. I'd been expecting this conversation for months. The name's Grant Winchester. I'm 51 years old, and I'd just been handed the best gift of my professional life, even though Coleman Ashford didn't know it yet. The executive conference room at Anderson Automotive reeked of burnt coffee and that fake leather smell that comes from furniture trying too hard to look expensive. Coleman was already planted in his oversized chair when I walked in, shuffling through paperwork like he was handling classified intel instead of quarterly reports for a mid-sized automotive supplier in suburban Detroit. 22 years I'd been running manufacturing operations for this company. Started here, when I was 29, fresh out of 8 years in the Marines, with enough combat engineering experience to understand how things actually work when your life depends on getting it right. 22 years of 60-hour weeks, missed family dinners and weekend calls about production line failures. 22 years of watching my lean manufacturing innovations save Anderson Automotive millions while Coleman took credit at industry conferences. The irony wasn't lost on me. Anderson Automotive had been my father-in-law's company since 1985 when he married the previous owner's daughter and inherited a decent-sized shop that made brake components for Ford. By the time I married his daughter Diana in 2003, Coleman had expanded into full automotive assembly subcontracting, and he needed someone who actually understood modern manufacturing processes instead of the old school, if it ain't broke, don't fix it mentality. That someone turned out to be me, fresh out of the Corps with ideas about process optimization, quality control systems, and statistical analysis that sounded like military jargon to Coleman, but made perfect sense to the Ford procurement managers who were demanding 99% defect-free delivery rates. "Grant," Coleman said, finally looking up with that flat expression he reserved for disappointing the help. His voice had that tone rich guys perfect when they're about to ruin someone's day without losing a minute of sleep over it. "Let's get straight to business. We're cutting your salary in half. Take it or leave it." I kept my face neutral, a skill you develop after 8 years of dealing with officers who mistake volume for leadership. Inside, though, I was running tactical assessments. 22 years of marriage to his daughter. 22 years of 94% efficiency ratings while our competition struggled to break 80%. 22 years of saving his operation every time Ford threatened to pull contracts because of delivery delays or quality issues. "I understand," I replied, my voice steady as a properly calibrated torque wrench. "When does this take effect?" His smirk spread across his face like hydraulic fluid staining concrete. Coleman thought he'd finally put the jarhead in his place. The man practically glowed with satisfaction, probably already planning how he'd tell this story at the Dearborn Country Club. "Immediately," he continued, clearly savoring every word like aged whiskey he couldn't afford before marrying into money. I nodded once, slow and deliberate. Perfect timing. Those 2 words hung in the air between us like exhaust fumes in a poorly ventilated garage. Coleman's expression faltered for just a fraction of a second, not long enough for most people to notice, but I'd been reading pressure gauges and stress indicators for 22 years. You learn to catch the small variations that signal bigger problems ahead. See, Coleman Ashford might have inherited a profitable business and expanded it through aggressive bidding and family connections, but he'd made one crucial mistake over the past 8 weeks. He'd underestimated the guy who actually kept his production lines running at 94% efficiency, while his competition struggled with outdated equipment and management practices that belonged in the 1980s. The beautiful thing about working in automotive manufacturing is that everything runs on relationships and reputation. When Shane Miller at Hughes Industrial Solutions needed someone to troubleshoot a defect rate problem that was costing them their GM contract, he didn't call Anderson Automotive's main office. He called me directly, because he knew I was the one who'd actually solved similar problems for 3 other suppliers in the past 2 years. When our biggest Ford contract was on the line because of delivery delays that Coleman's son Trevor couldn't manage despite his MBA from Michigan State, I was the one who redesigned our production flow to meet their cycle time requirements. Reduced setup time from 45 minutes to 12 minutes using principles I'd learned coordinating equipment maintenance and forward operating bases where downtime could get people killed. Coleman might have signed the contracts and taken credit for operational improvements at industry dinners, but the engineers and plant managers knew who actually made the numbers work. They knew who showed up at 5 a.m. when a critical machine went down on Saturday morning. They knew who stayed until midnight recalibrating quality control systems to meet new automotive specifications. For the past 8 weeks, I'd been quietly documenting every process improvement, every supplier relationship, and every client contact that had Grant Winchester's fingerprints on it, instead of the Ashford family legacy. Turns out, after 22 years of actually doing the work while other people took credit for it, that list was longer than I'd expected. The phone call from Monica Rivers had come at exactly the right time, like a perfectly timed supply drop in hostile territory. Rivers Manufacturing had been watching Anderson Automotive's operations for months, and they'd noticed something that Coleman had apparently missed. Most of our innovations, improvements, and client relationships traced back to one person who wasn't named Ashford. "Grant," she'd said when I answered the phone that Tuesday afternoon 8 weeks ago, "this is Monica Rivers from Rivers Manufacturing. Do you have a few minutes to talk about your future? Your future. Not the company's future, or the Ashford family's future. My future." When was the last time someone at Anderson Automotive had asked about Grant Winchester's professional goals instead of assuming I'd be grateful for whatever opportunities fell off Coleman's table? "I've got time," I'd replied suddenly, more interested in this conversation than the production variance reports I'd been reviewing. Monica Rivers had a reputation in the industry that made grown procurement managers nervous and competitors lose sleep. She'd built Rivers Manufacturing from a small California operation into a major player by doing exactly what Coleman refused to do: investing in modern equipment, treating suppliers like partners instead of vendors, and hiring people based on competence instead of family connections. "We've been watching your work at Anderson for quite some time," she'd continued, her voice carrying that West Coast confidence that comes from building something real instead of inheriting it. "Your lean manufacturing implementations are exactly what we need for our Midwest expansion. More importantly, your reputation with the UAW leadership could be invaluable." The UAW connection was something Coleman had never fully appreciated. Wade Thompson, the local rep, had been dealing with Anderson's management for 8 years, and he'd learned to work around Coleman's old-school attitude toward union relationships. But Wade and I had developed mutual respect based on something revolutionary: actually listening to what the floor workers said about safety concerns and process improvements. When I'd proposed implementing workplace organization principles 2 years ago, Wade had been the one who helped me sell it to the shop floor guys, who'd been skeptical of anything that sounded like management consultant nonsense. We'd started with one assembly station as a pilot program, and within 3 months, we'd reduced setup time by 35% while cutting workplace injuries by half. Coleman had taken credit for the safety improvement numbers in his annual report to the board, but he'd never bothered learning what the program actually meant or why it worked. To him, it was just another acronym that Grant had implemented to make the insurance company happy. "The offer is straightforward," Monica had explained during that first phone call. "VP of Manufacturing Innovation, full authority over production systems design, 40% salary increase over your current compensation, and equity participation that could set you up for early retirement if our expansion meets projections." 40% over my current salary would have been impressive enough. But the equity stake made it clear that Rivers Manufacturing wasn't just hiring another employee. They were looking for a partner who could help them revolutionize automotive supply chain management across the Midwest. More importantly, Monica understood something that Coleman had never figured out in 35 years of business ownership. In automotive manufacturing, relationships matter more than corporate letterhead, and trust matters more than family connections. The suppliers who kept Anderson Automotive running, companies like Torres Components and Davis Precision Systems, had been dealing with me directly for years because I was the one who actually understood their capabilities and limitations. When Angela Torres needed to retool her operation to meet new Ford specifications, she called me at home on Sunday morning because she knew I'd have practical suggestions instead of corporate bureaucracy. When Carlos Mendez at Midwest Logistics was having quality control issues with his heat treating process, we'd worked together for 3 weekends straight until we figured out that his furnace temperature was drifting 15 degrees during long production runs. Coleman never knew about those problem-solving sessions because he was too busy playing golf with potential investors to notice the details that kept major contracts from going to competitors. The client relationships were even more telling. Rachel Davis at Parker Automotive Systems had been frustrated for months with delivery delays that Coleman's son Brady kept promising to fix but never addressed. Brady had a finance degree and could analyze cost structures all day long, but he'd never spent time on a production floor understanding why setup changeovers were taking 45 minutes instead of the industry standard 20 minutes. During our last quarterly review meeting, Rachel had made her position crystal clear. Grant, you've been the only reason we've stuck with Anderson this long. Your process improvements saved us $18,000 last year and reduced inventory costs alone. If you were working somewhere else, somewhere that actually gave you the authority to implement your ideas instead of just suggesting them, we'd seriously consider following you. Following me, not following Anderson Automotive or the Ashford family reputation. Following Grant Winchester's track record of actually solving problems instead of just talking about solutions. The hardest part about Monica's offer wasn't the professional opportunity. It was keeping it quiet at home. Diana had started noticing my late nights and phone calls, but her curiosity operated about as deep as a surface inspection. When she asked where I'd been, I'd tell her the truth. Company business. She just assumed I meant her father's company. You've been working so hard lately, honey, she'd say, not looking up from whatever home renovation show was occupying her attention that particular evening. Dad must really be keeping you busy with end-of-quarter reports. Diana lived in a world where Daddy always knew best, and Grant always did what he was told. The possibility that I might be planning my own professional future instead of just accepting whatever Coleman decided it should be had probably never crossed her mind. But living with the Ashford family for 22 years had taught me something valuable about reading between the lines. When Coleman's sons, Trevor and Brady, started showing up for casual family dinners more often than usual, asking careful questions about production schedules and client relationships, I knew something was brewing. The salary cut hadn't come out of nowhere. It was part of a larger plan to squeeze me out while keeping access to the relationships and innovations I'd built over 2 decades. Coleman figured that cutting my pay would either force me to quit, leaving behind everything I'd developed, or make me desperate enough to accept whatever terms he offered to stay. What Coleman hadn't counted on was that I'd been documenting everything for weeks, not out of paranoia, but out of professional habit. When you're responsible for maintaining 94% efficiency ratings across 6 production lines, you learn to track variables that affect performance. And in this case, the biggest variable affecting Anderson Automotive's performance was family politics interfering with operational decisions. Take the incident 3 months ago when Trevor convinced Coleman to switch to a cheaper supplier for our hydraulic components. The new supplier's lead times were 30% longer, and their tolerance specifications were loose enough to drive a forklift through. I'd run the numbers and presented a detailed analysis showing that the cost savings would be wiped out by increased setup time and higher defect rates. Coleman had listened to my presentation with the kind of polite attention you give to insurance salesmen, then went with Trevor's recommendation anyway because the boy needs to learn the business. Within 6 weeks, we were dealing with a quality crisis that cost us a $500,000 Ford contract and nearly triggered a UAW grievance over defective equipment causing safety hazards. Guess who got blamed for not anticipating the supplier's quality control problems? And guess who worked 80-hour weeks for the next month, redesigning our inspection protocols to catch defects that shouldn't have been there in the first place? But I'd learned something valuable from that disaster. Coleman and his sons were operating on assumptions about manufacturing that were about 15 years out of date. They still thought you could solve quality problems by inspecting harder instead of building better processes. They believed that loyalty to suppliers mattered more than performance specifications, and they were convinced that family connections could substitute for technical expertise when it came to managing complex automotive supply chains. Wade Thompson had pulled me aside after one particularly heated safety meeting where Coleman had dismissed worker concerns about the new hydraulic components. "Grant," he'd said, checking to make sure we were out of earshot from management, "you know these guys are setting us all up for failure, right? The shop floor workers trust you because you actually listen and fix problems. But sooner or later, Coleman is going to blame you for every crisis his boys create." Wade was right, and I'd started keeping detailed records of every recommendation I'd made that got overruled, every safety concern that got postponed, and every process improvement that got shelved because it didn't fit with the Ashford family's vision of how things should work. When Monica's offer came along, those records became my insurance policy. Not for litigation, I'd never been the type to solve problems through lawyers, but for something more valuable, credibility. Every supplier relationship I'd built, every process improvement I'd designed, every client problem I'd solved, all of it was documented with timestamps, email trails, and measurable results. After 22 years of having my work attributed to company leadership and my setbacks blamed on operational challenges, I finally had proof of what Grant Winchester had actually contributed to Anderson Automotive's success. The proof came in handy during my second conversation with Monica when she'd asked the question that separated serious job opportunities from fishing expeditions. If you joined Rivers Manufacturing, what would you bring with you besides experience? I'd been ready with specifics. Supplier relationships worth $15 million in annual contracts. Quality control systems that had reduced defect rates by 60% over 3 years. Safety protocols that had cut workplace injuries by half while increasing productivity. Client relationships where procurement managers requested me personally for technical problem solving. More importantly, I'd brought something that you can't buy or inherit, the trust of people who actually make things work. UAW leadership who knew I'd fight for reasonable safety standards. Suppliers who knew I'd work with them to solve problems instead of just demanding better performance. Clients who knew I'd deliver solutions that actually worked instead of promises that sounded good in meetings. Monica had been impressed enough to arrange a face-to-face meeting in Detroit, where I'd gotten my first look at Rivers Manufacturing's operation. The difference between their facility and Anderson Automotive was like comparing a modern Formula One garage to a 1980s community college auto shop. They had real-time production monitoring systems that tracked efficiency metrics I could only dream about implementing at Anderson. Their quality control used statistical process control with automated data collection that made our clipboard and spreadsheet approach look like we were running a lemonade stand. And their employee training programs actually taught people about lean manufacturing principles instead of just expecting them to figure it out through trial and error. This is what modern automotive manufacturing looks like, Monica had explained as we walked through their main production area. Predictive maintenance schedules based on actual equipment performance data. Inventory management that responds to real demand signals instead of guesswork. Quality systems that prevent defects instead of just catching them after they happen. But the most impressive thing wasn't the technology, it was the culture. Workers at Rivers Manufacturing actually suggested improvements instead of just following orders. Supervisors collaborated with engineers instead of treating them like troublemakers. Management made decisions based on data instead of politics. Standing in that facility, watching efficiency and innovation work together like they were supposed to, I'd realized something that probably should have been obvious years earlier. I'd been wasting my talents trying to modernize a company that was fundamentally committed to staying stuck in the past. Coleman Ashford wasn't just resistant to change. He was actively hostile to any improvement that might require him to admit that his old-school approach wasn't the best way to run a modern manufacturing operation. And his sons were following the same pattern, treating the business like an inheritance to be preserved instead of an operation to be optimized. That's when I'd made my decision not just to accept Monica's offer, but to do it in a way that would send a clear message to every supplier, client, and competitor in the Midwest automotive industry. The annual Manufacturing Excellence Conference in Chicago was coming up in 2 weeks. Anderson Automotive was a platinum sponsor, which meant Coleman would be delivering a keynote presentation about traditional values and proven methods to an audience of industry professionals who actually understood what modern manufacturing excellence looked like. Monica had secured a last-minute speaking slot after another company pulled out due to budget constraints. Rivers Manufacturing would be announcing their Midwest expansion during the conference's second day, right after Coleman finished his presentation about maintaining industry leadership through traditional approaches. The timing wasn't accidental. Monica had a sense of dramatic timing that I was really starting to appreciate. Is there anything else you'd like to discuss? I asked Coleman, standing up from my chair with the kind of calm that probably made him wonder if I'd been hitting the bourbon before our meeting. Coleman waved a dismissive hand. That's all. Grant, I'm sure you understand the position the company is in. The position the company was in, right? The company that had just posted record quarterly profits thanks to lean manufacturing implementations I'd spent 3 years perfecting was apparently so financially stressed that they needed to cut my salary in half. Made perfect sense when you didn't think about it at all. I walked toward the door, then paused with my hand on the brass handle. Coleman, I want you to know that I really do appreciate everything you've done for me. His chest puffed up like a compressor reaching maximum pressure. Well, Grant, I've always tried to take care of family. I was family when he needed someone to troubleshoot a catastrophic equipment failure on Christmas Eve. I was family when Ford's quality auditors showed up unannounced and found defects that could have shut down our entire operation. But when it came time for credit, respect, or basic professional recognition, suddenly I was just the guy who'd married his daughter and should be grateful for whatever opportunities came his way. Absolutely, I agreed. You've really opened my eyes to a lot of things. Coleman nodded sagely, completely missing the double meaning. For a guy who'd spent 35 years in business, he had a remarkable talent for not reading the room. As I walked out of his office, I pulled out my phone and scrolled to Monica Rivers' contact. I'd been avoiding this decision for 8 weeks, playing the loyal employee while documenting every reason why that loyalty was a one-way street. Monica, I typed, "That offer still on the table?" Ready to discuss specifics, her response came back in less than 30 seconds, always. "Welcome to the team Chicago conference announcement." I looked back at Coleman's office door, imagining him in there already planning how he'd explain the salary reduction to the board of directors. Tough decisions about compensation structure, he'd probably say, reducing operational overhead to maintain competitive positioning. Perfect timing, I typed back. Let's make it memorable. The Manufacturing Excellence Conference happened exactly 2 weeks later. Coleman spent the morning strutting around the Chicago Convention Center like he'd personally invented the assembly line, shaking hands with industry veterans and taking credit for operational improvements he couldn't spell correctly, let alone implement. I sat in the audience during his keynote presentation, watching him deliver his usual speech about traditional values and time-tested processes to a room full of manufacturing professionals who actually understood what operational excellence looked like in the 21st century. "We don't chase every new trend that comes along," Coleman declared, clicking through slides that showed Anderson Automotive's steady growth over the past decade. "We focus on proven methods, reliable partnerships, and the kind of hands-on leadership that can't be replaced by consulting reports or business school theories." Proven methods, reliable partnerships, hands-on leadership. He was basically taking credit for everything I'd been doing for 22 years while making it sound like innovation was some kind of dangerous experiment that threatened the natural order of manufacturing. The audience was politely attentive, giving him the kind of scattered applause that conference attendees perfect after years of sitting through presentations that range from mildly useful to actively painful. Then the conference moderator introduced Monica Rivers. "Thank you all for being here today," Monica began, her voice carrying easily through the convention center sound system. "I want to talk about something that's been on my mind lately, the difference between maintaining yesterday's standards and actually leading tomorrow's innovations." She was taking everything Coleman had just said about traditional values and turning it into an argument for why those things were actually limitations in a rapidly changing market. Brilliant. Which is why I'm excited to announce Rivers Manufacturing's expansion into the Detroit automotive corridor. She continued, bringing proven innovations and fresh leadership to a market that's ready for companies willing to embrace the future instead of hiding from it. I felt my heart rate spike as Monica's eyes found mine in the audience. "Successful expansion requires the right leadership team," she said, advancing to her next slide. "People who understand both traditional manufacturing excellence and modern operational innovation, which is why I'm thrilled to introduce our new VP of Manufacturing Innovation." The room went dead silent as she gestured toward me. "Please join me in welcoming Grant Winchester to the Rivers Manufacturing team." I stood up and walked down the aisle toward the stage, feeling like I was heading to my own professional resurrection. 500 industry professionals, including every major player in the Midwest automotive supply chain, watching as I shook hands with the CEO who just declared war on everything my father-in-law represented. Behind me, I could hear Coleman's sharp intake of breath, the kind of sound a man makes when he realizes his house is on fire and the fire department is busy washing their trucks. Grant brings 22 years of proven manufacturing excellence and established industry relationships to our Detroit expansion. Monica announced to the crowd, "His innovations have consistently delivered measurable results, and we're confident his leadership will make our Midwest operations profitable from day one." 6 months later, I was standing on the production floor of Rivers Manufacturing's new Detroit facility, watching assembly lines that operated at 97% efficiency move automotive components with precision that made Coleman's operation look like a high school shop class. The numbers told the story better than any corporate press release could. Rivers Manufacturing had captured 65% of Anderson Automotive's major accounts within 4 months. Key suppliers had followed me to a company that treated them like partners instead of vendors. Even Wade Thompson had helped facilitate a smooth transition for the UAW workers who joined our operation when Anderson's contracts started drying up. Coleman's company was hemorrhaging talent and contracts. Last I heard, they'd laid off 40% of their workforce and were desperately trying to find a buyer before bankruptcy became inevitable. Trevor and Brady were scrambling to save what they could, finally learning what happens when you mistake inherited privilege for earned competence. Coleman tried calling me exactly once, about 3 months after the conference. His voicemail was a masterpiece of corporate desperation disguised as family reconciliation. Grant, I think there may have been some misunderstandings about your role in compensation. Perhaps we could discuss how to move forward in a way that benefits everyone involved. Misunderstandings about my role. I deleted the message without calling back. Deanna filed for divorce 4 months later. She'd finally figured out that Daddy's golden boy wasn't so golden anymore, and being married to the guy who'd exposed the family business as a house of cards wasn't going to help her social standing at the country club. I signed the papers without contest. After 22 years of marriage, we'd become strangers anyway. These days, industry publications call me the engineer who modernized Detroit manufacturing, which is probably giving me more credit than I deserve, but sounds pretty impressive on business cards. The truth is simpler. I just stopped accepting a situation that wasted my capabilities and started working for people who recognized what I brought to the table. Standing in that production facility, watching innovation and efficiency work together like they were designed to, I realized something that probably should have been obvious years ago. Sometimes the biggest risk isn't taking a chance on something new. Sometimes the biggest risk is staying loyal to people who've never earned that loyalty in the first place. Your worth isn't determined by who's willing to pay you. It's proven by who's willing to follow you when you walk away from those who don't appreciate what you bring to the table. In the Marines, we learned that respect is earned through actions, not inherited through bloodlines. Some battles choose you, and when they do, you fight with everything you've learned. Sometimes the most dangerous loyalty is the one you give to people who mistake your dedication for desperation because they'll keep cutting your value until you finally realize you were never the problem, you were just in the wrong place. The most powerful revenge isn't destroying your enemies. It's building something so successful that they destroy themselves trying to compete with what they threw away.
I'm freezing. I'm bleeding. Slowly fading away. But don't worry. I'm fine. The cold has settled in my heartbeat, like winter living in my veins. Every breath feels numb and fragile. Every smile just hides the pain. I'm breaking quietly in silence, falling slow without a sound. Yet I keep saying I'm okay, while my world burns to the ground. I'm frozen here, I'm bleeding slowly, dying piece by piece inside. But I still whisper, it's alright, just to keep you from goodbye. I'm shattered, love, but don't you worry. I'll pretend till my last breath, even while my soul is fading. I'll say everything's okay. Maybe pain just learned to live here. Maybe sorrow feels like home. So I wear my wounds like armor and survive them all alone. I'm frozen here, I'm bleeding slowly, dying piece by piece inside. But I still whisper, it's alright, just to keep you from goodbye. I'm shattered, love, but don't you worry. I'll pretend till my last breath, even while my soul is fading. I'll say everything's okay. If you ever see me smiling, no, it's just my last defense. 'Cause sometimes love means hiding how much you're suffering. No, I'm frozen here, I'm bleeding slowly, dying piece by piece inside. But I still whisper, it's alright, just to keep you from goodbye. I'm shattered, love, but don't you worry. I'll pretend till my last breath, even while my soul is fading. I'll say everything's okay. it's okay.
They say just forget. Move on like it's easy. But forgetting you feels like remembering someone I've never seen. I've been trying to erase you from the places in my mind, but the harder that I fight it, the more you're hard to leave behind. Every memory keeps slipping through the cracks I try to close, like a face I should remember, but somehow never know. Forgetting you feels impossible, like chasing something I can't hold, like trying to remember someone that I've never even known. I keep reaching through the silence for a past I can't undo, 'cause letting go of what we had feels like losing something true. Every moment turns to fragments, every thought just fades to blue, like I'm searching for a feeling that still only leads to you. Forgetting you feels impossible, like chasing something I can't hold, like trying to remember someone that I've never even known. I keep reaching through the silence for a past I can't undo, 'cause letting go of what we had feels like losing something true. But now every empty moment still reminds me what is real. Forgetting you feels impossible, like chasing something I can't hold, like trying to remember someone that I've never even known. I keep reaching through the silence for a past I can't undo, 'cause letting go of what we had feels like losing something true.